Ooh, that's a lot to follow. Sally Yates. When Sally Yates was young, she knew that she had to one day go into the family business, and that meant doing one of two things: being a lawyer or being a Methodist preacher. Now, knowing what I know, there is little doubt in my mind that had she chosen, she would have been one of the greatest Methodist preachers ever to live. And we could have all been right now at a big convention celebrating her contributions to the faith. And just putting it out there, I Googled, and it turns out that the Methodist Church's General Convention happens every 4 years. It's this February 23rd in St. Louis if this lawyer thing doesn't work out. I think she could just show up. It'd be fine. Needless to say, everyone here can be grateful of the career choice she did make. She's been a legal star since law school. She spent 27 years as a federal prosecutor in Atlanta, steadily rising through the ranks and becoming the first woman to serve as U.S. attorney for the office. Then, in 2015, she took over as Deputy Attorney General, the number 2 position at the Justice Department. Now, for those of you who don't know, that is a truly massive job. It functions as a sort of chief operating officer for an organization with more than 110,000 employees worldwide. In that role, she oversaw huge federal agencies and some of the most sensitive criminal and national security matters possible. Through it all, she made clear to everyone around her that our goal wasn't winning at all costs as prosecutors. It was about respect for the rule of law and always doing what was right. Now, anyone can look on the internet and find and read about the case victories that we had, the department's multi-million-dollar settlements, or big public safety prosecutions. But it's actually the reforms that she championed that perhaps say the most about her commitment to justice as an ideal. Just to name a couple, she advocated for smart sentencing policies. She oversaw the department's clemency initiative. She worked to better prepare inmates for their return to society. And in recognition of the latent prejudices we all hold, she guided the department through its first ever implicit bias training for every single law enforcement officer and every single prosecutor across the country. Now, none of this would have been possible without the right leadership. And from the very first days of working very closely with Sally on her Senate confirmation, I was lucky enough to see up close every day what makes her so special. Now, the Senate confirmation process for a job that big isn't just about figuring out how to count to 51 votes, or 84, as the case was here. You're telling a public servant's story to the American people for the first time. And that's a very intense process, and through that, you really begin to see what someone's values are. Now, I am certain that there are people who can fake it. Now, luckily, on the other hand, there are people whose intellect, respect for others, and near pathological desire to do the right thing are inseparable from their very being. And when you work all day, every day with someone like that, these values become abundantly clear very quickly. During our time together, Sally embodied all of these virtues and was as pleasant to work for as she was to work with. And I am certainly a better advocate and better attorney today because of it. Ladies and gentlemen, the 36th Deputy Attorney General of the United States, and Attorney General for a little while too, but that got awkward, Sally Yates.
Elliot, to call that a kind introduction wouldn't do it justice. You know, I miss a lot of things about not being part of DOJ, but the thing I miss the most is the opportunity to work with people like Elliot and the shared mission that we had at DOJ. So I want to thank Caroline and everybody here at ACS for the honor of being able to join you here this evening. And I also just have to say thank you to all of our honorees tonight. I mean, I got to tell you, I am humbled and inspired by each and every one of them. And I think we will all walk out of here tonight even more resolved than we were when we walked in here because of the work that they do every day. So thank you for that. You know, I feel particularly privileged to be able to be here with you tonight in the midst of this time. And in preparing for tonight, I went on the ACS website and I took a look there, and you know, you've got the banner of American Constitution Society there, and then right underneath it in big bold letters, it says, "More important than ever." And I think that pretty much succinctly and urgently captures it. You know, over the course of our nation's history, we have faced inflection points where we had to decide who we are and what we stand for. Now is such a time. We all know that we're a diverse country with a wide range of views on issues. And that's really a good thing, because that's part of what makes our country so strong. We debate these issues, and out of that rigorous debate should come the best answers to those issues. At the defining moments of our history, we've really grappled with the direction of our country. We've approached those moments with perspectives that are as diverse as our people, but yet we have searched for the common principles that bind us together. At our best moments, we have resisted those who seek to tear us apart by sowing fear and division for political gain. At our best moments, we have put country before party and the common good before personal ambition. And at our very best moments, at the moments that have defined what it means to be Americans, we have stood up and acted. We have acted to demonstrate what it means to hold our country to its promises. We have lived our love of country, and we have rejected those who wrap themselves in the flag to disguise distinctly un-American objectives. So the question is, will this be such a moment? Because while some are caught trying to score news cycle victories, there's really something much more fundamental hanging in the balance. And that is, will we remain faithful to our country's core values? You know, I think our values live and breathe in our Constitution and our laws that are not a sterile set of rules, but rather a reflection of who we are, or at least who we aspire to be. And I say aspire to be because I think we have to acknowledge we haven't always lived up to our ideals. Back at the time of our founding, when the Declaration of Independence was penned, declaring that all men are created equal, we enslaved hundreds of thousands of African Americans. Not so long ago, all across the Jim Crow South, our country's very definition was threatened by lynchings and burning buses of freedom riders and the systematic disenfranchisement of African American voters. And still today, we have yet to fully realize our country's promise of equal justice. Today, there are those who cynically appeal to our worst instincts, who breed tribalism and division for their own personal or political advantage, who offer pretext to conceal religious discrimination, who are indifferent at best to racial equality, and who simply do not respect the basic humanity of all people. Our history is littered by the presence of individuals and factions who have tried to exploit our imperfections. But it's more powerfully marked by those whose vigilance toward a more perfect union has prevailed. Despite our differences, I think we as Americans have long held a shared vision of what our country means and what values we expect our leaders to embody. We have embraced the words on the Statue of Liberty, welcoming the tired, the poor, the huddled masses as something more than just a poem, but rather a reflection of who we are, a nation of immigrants, a beautiful swirl of nationalities and races and religions. We have revered justice as the cornerstone of our democracy. We have protected freedom of speech, our right to protest and be heard, even when, actually especially when, we disagree with the ideas that are being expressed. We have prized the freedom to worship how we choose without the intervention of the state and without discrimination based on that choice. We have steadfastly safeguarded a free press that's essential for an informed electorate and to hold our government and our leaders accountable. And we have held up the rule of law to the entire world as the bedrock of our republic. The rule of law, our country's foundational covenant that the laws apply equally to everyone and that no one is above the law. You know, even before our independence, Thomas Paine reminded the colonists in no uncertain terms that in a free republic, in America, the law is king, but in absolute governments, the king is law. And in over the 200 years since that time, we have lived by that defining principle. And despite incessant bravado, there's not a tweet or a memo or a cable news appearance that can elevate anyone above the law. The rule of law depends on not only the things that are written down, but also important traditions and norms like apolitical law enforcement and an independent Justice Department. Now, while DOJ is obviously part of the executive branch, it's not just any old agency. It's the only agency that is named for a virtue. It has a singular mission, and that is to seek justice. It has the authority to deprive individuals of their liberty, and it's charged with fulfilling our nation's basic promise of equal and impartial justice. And that's why it's a time-honored norm, at least since Watergate, for there to be a strict separation between the Justice Department and the White House on investigations and cases, a separation that is essential to ensure that the power of the state isn't used to punish one's enemies or to protect one's friends. Now, while there may be interaction on broad policies, past administrations, Democratic and Republican alike, have respectfully embraced that the rule of law requires that prosecutive decisions be made not only without any real interference, but without even the perception of interference. But today, we are met with an almost daily barrage of attempts to order up investigations of former political rivals, intervention on behalf of friends, relentless attempts to sow distrust of the FBI and the Department of Justice, direction to investigate the investigators, and the most recent declaration that our laws do not apply to the president, which must have Thomas Paine spinning in his grave right now. Some iteration of this happens on almost a daily basis, and if it's met without much more than a roll of the eyes, then the rule of law starts to erode and to slip away. And the public just comes to believe that this is how our system works. This is not how it works. The rule of law is what separates us from an autocracy. and the rule of law requires truth. The imperative of truth is something that you would think wouldn't really require citation. It really courses through our entire national identity. Our Declaration of Independence begins, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." When a witness is sworn to testify in a trial, they swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And every public servant, from the president on down, swears in his or her oath to bear true faith and allegiance to our Constitution. There is such a thing as objective truth. We can debate policies and issues, and we should, but those debates have to be based on common facts, on truth, rather than on raw appeals to emotion or fear or alternative facts that are just plain made up. Not only is there such a thing as objective truth, but failing to tell the truth matters. We can't control whether our public servants tell the truth, but we can control whether we hold them accountable, or whether, in a state of exhaustion or to protect political objectives, we look the other way and then normalize an indifference to truth. Norms like truth and the rule of law and democratic institutions like an independent judiciary and apolitical law enforcement and a free press, these things form the infrastructure of our democracy. Without these institutions and norms, we devolve into something less than what our founders created, something less than what our soldiers have given their lives to protect, and something less than what our future generations deserve. And the fact that so far it appears that our institutions are pretty much holding isn't good enough. It's not enough for the Department of Justice to make decisions that are free from political considerations if Americans lose their confidence that the laws are being applied equally to all. And it's not enough that the judiciary doesn't bend to attacks if the public comes to believe that so-called judges are subverting the law. And it's not enough that the press continues to report the news, because if the public no longer believes and trusts that reporting to be true, and if critical stories can just be waved away with a hand declaring them to be fake news, well, then the road to autocracy is paved, and we become a different country. This is not a time to be passive. Our democratic institutions, our core values, the norms that form the fabric of our democracy, they don't protect themselves. And that's where all of you come in. You know, I'm really proud of the work that we did at the Department of Justice during the Obama administration to represent the people of the United States, all the people of the United States. We fought hard to ensure that the right to vote was not merely something that was recited in our Constitution, but rather something that lived in every community across our country. We made strides in reforming the criminal justice system to be more fair and just. There's still a lot more to do, but we made progress. We forged long overdue reform in police departments all across the country. We fought, with the help of Don Verrilli, for the basic right to marry the person you love. And we stood in support of the fundamental dignity of the transgender community. But even during those times, that the Department of Justice has fully embraced its duty to protect the rights and liberties of all in our country, the fact is this responsibility can't be carried by DOJ alone. Attorney General Robert Kennedy knew that. Attorney General Kennedy gave his first public address as AG at the University of Georgia. It was Law Day in May of 1961, and Attorney General Kennedy took the podium just 4 months after the University of Georgia had to be ordered by a federal judge to admit the first 2 African-American students, Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes. Now, in response to the order, students rioted. The legislature actually tried to cut off funding to the University of Georgia to prevent their admission. And Hunter and Holmes were jeered just about everywhere they went. When Attorney General Kennedy stood to speak to a very tense audience, I might add, he told the crowd exactly what they could expect from his Justice Department. He told them that he agreed with Brown versus Board of Education, something that some of our judicial nominees have a hard time choking out today. But that regardless of whether he agreed with Brown or not, it was the law of the land, and his Justice Department was going to be enforcing it. He called upon them to live up to our founding principles, to, in his words, prove to the world that we really mean it when we say that all men are created free and equal before the law. And finally, he reminded them of the hypocrisy of words without action. He told them that on Law Day, all the high-sounding speeches about liberty and justice are meaningless unless people such as you and I breathe meaning and force into it. Today, 50 years after Attorney General Kennedy's death, that's what the American Constitution Society is doing. In the litany of actions you heard about earlier this evening from Carolyn, all of you at ACS are breathing meaning and force into liberty and justice. And that's what Donald Hollowell and Constance Baker Motley and Horace Ward and names that probably the young law students here don't know, but a young Vernon Jordan who was fresh out of law school, that's what all of those folks did when they took on the legal battle to force the University of Georgia to admit Hunter and Holmes. Brown had been decided 7 years earlier, but without these lawyers actively holding our country to its promise, Brown would have just been words on a page. That's what we all have to do. You know, sometimes people speak of this time that we're in now in terms of which side of history do you want to be on? I get that. I sure know which side of history I want to be on. But it's bigger than that. It's about what history is our country going to write? What course are we going to chart? Is this a momentary detour, or have we lost our way? I don't believe that we've lost our way. We're better than this. While over the course of our history, we have not always followed a noble path, I believe that in our heart of hearts, we are a generous, courageous, and inclusive people, dedicated to equality and justice and freedom. And if you doubt that, just think about the courage of the kids from Parkland and March from Our Lives when, in the wake of unspeakable tragedy and pain, they have found the fortitude and determination to demand that our country do something to end gun violence, violence that all too often we simply ignore in communities of color. Think of the generosity of doctors and volunteers who rushed to Puerto Rico after the hurricanes to help our fellow Americans with the basic necessities of food and water and electricity. Think of the dedication of scores of teachers across this country every single day who dip into their own pockets and their own meager paychecks to pay for supplies or stay late after school to ensure that every child there has what Abraham Lincoln called an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life. Think of the bravery of a young man or woman who raises his or her hand to volunteer to serve in our military, to protect all of us, recognizing that there's no way of knowing what they may ultimately be asked to do. Think of the resolve of women all across this country who are marching and running for office and voting and speaking their truth in ways that are changing our country. Think of the perseverance of public servants who go to work every day, now derided as the deep state or swamp creatures, who have, in fact, dedicated their professional lives to making our country better. And finally, think of the commitment to decency and equality that was demonstrated by the thousands of people who streamed to the airports to protest after the first travel ban, and the lawyers who likewise showed up at the airports to represent people there who were being turned away. You know, the vast majority of these folks were not individually impacted themselves by the travel ban, but yet they were moved to act because they believed that the ban was an anathema to the values of our country. This was really driven home to me in a letter that I received from a young couple on the West Coast who had gone to the airport after the first travel ban was stayed and immigrants were coming back into the country. And they had taken their little 2-year-old boy with them. And they sent me a photograph of him holding up this sign that was actually bigger than him. And on the sign, it read, "Welcome refugees and immigrants." And they wrote me that they went to the airport and they took their son because they wanted the people coming off of those planes to know who we are. And they wanted their little boy to grow up knowing who we are as well. That's the promise of America. That's who we are. That's what we stand for. And with a shared commitment to our founding values, that's who we'll remain. Thank you for allowing me to join you this evening.